The majority Indians are trying to give a picture that, okay, there was this forceful conversion going on throughout the history. No, if that was the case, today 80% of Indians would be Christians. You are Christians, but we don't think you are right.
Do you think that faith was exploited by the colonial powers for their gain?
Think about William Carey. He was a British missionary. He was not even allowed inside the country by the British authorities. If you become a Christian, we will not give job to you. You Christians, really, what are you doing in India?
Hello all, welcome to the very first episode of Ripples, where we are going to talk about a lot of Christian theologies, doubts and facts. In this podcast, we'll be covering a lot of topics that are not talked about much out there, and about doubts and various questions that is related to Christianity. And in the very first episode, we are going to talk about the history of Christianity in India. So, in India, how Christianity started, what are the early traces of Christianity in India, what colonialism played a part in India, and how the freedom fighting movement, everything, and what is the situation right now regarding Christianity and the Indian context. So, for today's episode, we have a very special guest, Mr. John Marshall. He's a theologian, he's an apologist, and he's a public speaker, and he's the founder of Credible Truth Ministry, which is a apologist based in Chennai, and we are very, very excited to have him over here. Without further ado, let's dive into this very first episode of Ripples. Hi, thank you for coming and being part of this. And please, I would like you to introduce yourself to the audience, where you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, you're welcome, and I really it's a pleasure for me to be here. And as you already said, I'm John Marshall. I'm a Christian apologist and a theologian. I have my own ministry. It's called Credible Truth Ministries. It's an apologetics ministry, basically defending the truths of the Christian faith. And I also teach religion, apologetics, and church history at Lakeview Life Center. It's a Bible college located in near Sri Perumbudur. And I really like the concept of Ripples. And it's just a wonderful occasion for me to be here, and looking forward to having a wonderful conversation with you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I just wanted to have this question also regarding how credible is the tradition that Saint Thomas, one of Jesus' apostle, brought Christianity to India, and are there any actual archaeological or textual sources that goes along with this? So what do you think about this? What is your take on this?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and a hard one too. The reason I say that is the early centuries, the first few centuries since Christ, has been, particularly in India, has been called the period of obscurity. And the reason why it's called the period of obscurity is we don't have much information about that particular period of Indian Christianity. We do have information. We have some archaeological records. We have quite a number of literary evidence, but all those information are dated to maybe 150 or 200 years after the alleged time of the Apostle Thomas in India. Okay. So when we're talking about evidence or sources that talk about the Apostle Thomas in India, we have the most, or the earliest evidence we have is from the latter part of the 2nd century. And so and before moving on to that, usually the literary evidence is divided into two parts. It's categorized into two parts. One kind of evidence is called the outside India sources or outside India evidence. Okay. That is to say that the information we have about the Apostle Thomas coming to India is actually from writings that were available or that were presented outside India. We're talking about a place called Edessa in the region of Persia.
Okay.
And then so those are one kind of information. They're called the outside India sources. Okay. And then we have the Indian sources. The Indian sources are pretty much oral tradition sources, which have come down into the written format much later, maybe 800, 900 years after the oral tradition had taken root. So let me talk about the outside India sources first, because those are, the manuscript evidence that we have, the literary evidences we have. So we have, even the outside India sources are categorized into two. One is the Eastern sources and the other is the Western sources. The reason why they divide that into Eastern and Western is because the Eastern sources are more or less in the language of Syriac. That the information about Saint Thomas in India is in Syriac language, and the Western sources are in Latin. So you have Eastern historians writing about this, about the arrival of Saint Thomas in India, in Syriac, and you have the Western sources about the arrival of the Apostle Thomas and his ministry in India written in Latin. So when we're talking about the Eastern sources, they are the earliest sources. So we have three important Eastern sources or Eastern literary evidence, and the first one is, it's called the Acts of Thomas. Acts of Thomas by Bardesanes, written in Syriac, as I already told you. Dated to roughly about 180 AD to 230 AD. So that's the dating of the earliest information we have about the Apostle Thomas coming to India. It is traditionally believed that the Apostle Thomas came to India around 52 AD and he died in 72 AD. So roughly about 20 years he lived.
20 years.
So all the churches he planted, everything, his ministry in India, both in the Malabar region and in the Coromandel region. So all that information we have is from, about 130, 150 years after the time of the Apostle Thomas. And that's why it's called the period of obscurity. The reason why I say it's called the period of obscurity is because we don't have contemporary evidence to suggest that this all happened. But that does not mean that all this evidence is, useless. It is credible because you look at the wealth of information that follows. Now, I said Acts of Thomas, and then we have, surrounding that time, we also have another literary evidence which is called the Teaching of the Apostles, which talks about the arrival of Saint Thomas in India, which talks about his ministry in India. And then you have several hymns composed by a famous Syriac poet called Saint Ephraim. So these three are...
So these are all manuscripts in Persian category, or like...
in Syriac. They're all written in Syriac language, which originates from Edessa, which is in Persia. So we have these manuscripts, and it is available today. We can look it up. It's all scholarly, scholarly evidence that we have. But it does not date all the way back to the time of the Apostle Thomas, or what we naturally call the time of the Apostle Thomas. It does not match to that time, but what happened during that time is recorded by these literature. So these are Eastern sources. We do have lots of Western historians, talking about the Apostle Thomas. Historians like Eusebius. Now, Eusebius is a famous church historian, the Western church historian. He quotes Origen, who's also an early church father, who lived in the late 2nd century, about 180s, 190s, all the way up to the middle of the 3rd century. He's quoting Origen, and Origen talks about the Apostle Thomas coming to India. So we not only have Eastern sources, we have Western sources corroborating, the Eastern evidence that is presented regarding the Apostle Thomas. And not only Eusebius, we have Bishop Gregory of Nazianzus, we have church historian Jerome. All these are Western church historians writing in Latin about the ministry of Saint Thomas. We have Saint Paulinus, who was a bishop in Nola. So we have multiple Western and Eastern sources, both in Syriac and in Latin, talking about the coming of the Apostle Thomas and his ministry in India. But the difficulty is the reason why some scholars are hesitant to believe in the evidence that is presented right now is because you have the Indian source or the Indian evidence, which is pretty much oral. nothing was written in the Indian languages. The Indian languages that were spoken at that particular point in time were predominantly some form of Tamil, maybe morphed into, blending into some form of Malayalam or something like that. Because the Malabar region was pretty much filled with people speaking the Proto-Dravidian language, Tamil being one of the oldest. So you have a mixture of Tamil, Malayalam, which was not, it has similarities to the Tamil that we speak today, but some of the words were different. But the Indian sources does not have what you call literature or evidence of manuscript or something like that.
Okay.
But we do have Indian sources. We have three important sources. That is Indian, evidence for that. You have three, written in the format of songs. Okay. So one is called the Rabban Patu. Rabban Patu is one, the earliest one. Then you have the Veeradayan Patu and the Margam Kali Patu.
So these are all written in Tamil, or like is
written. Actually, we don't have the originals of this. Alleged to be written in the local language, which is Tamil.
Okay.
So it is believed, now as I said, we don't have written historical record about the Indian sources.
These are all sung and then passed on.
And these three songs are supposedly written by a disciple of the Apostle Thomas.
Okay.
And so these three songs were memorized by the followers of the Apostle Thomas, and this oral tradition carried on. So in these three songs you have information about the Apostle Thomas and his ministry in India. And so this oral tradition finally came into writing in about the 10th, 11th century.
Okay.
And this oral tradition was then taken into account, into literature by European visitors like Marco Polo. Marco Polo, who came to India in the 13th century, who was actually on the way to China, Mongolia, China. He wanted to visit there, but then he found India in between. So he came to India and he found that there is Christianity here. And so he was really astonished. And so, when he tried to look at its history, he found a strong oral tradition of Christians already present in India. And so he documents it.
So when did he come? What was
about the late 1200s, accurately 1288. He came twice actually.
Okay.
In 1288 AD and 1292 AD. So in the 13th century.
Oh, wow.
And he documents the oral tradition of the St. Thomas Christians. And we also have John of Monte Corvino, who came later, about 5-6 years after that.
Okay.
And then you have John D. Marignoli. And then we have Niccolo di Conti, one other famous, Italian, explorer. And all these, information about these people, the Indian Christians, have been documented by these European visitors. And so they record a strong presence of Christianity even before the 10th century AD. So they talk about the Apostle Thomas being in India. So I think we have a wealth of information concerning the Apostle Thomas and his ministry in India. The only question that scholars are asking is, how much would you trust or how much would you believe these documents to be talking about, events that happened in the first century? How do we, because it's not these documents, these information that we have, particularly the Eastern sources, they are the earliest, latter half of the 2nd century and the 3rd century. The Western sources from the 3rd century, 4th century, 5th century onwards, you have Western sources talking about this. But the lack of literary evidence for the Indian tradition is where some scholars are really slightly doubtful. But again, these doubts can be clarified if you actually get into those places and see.
Okay.
Now I have
mean right now in Kerala, those kind of areas is what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'd like to list two famous historians who talk about, they've dedicated their entire lives to studying St. Thomas Christianity. And a historian named by the name of Placid Potipora, this is what he says after researching it.
Okay.
He says, when you look at the Indian tradition, you go to the Malabar region and you see the places, where Saint Thomas has come, you will never find contradictory traditions there. So, for example, if something is historically, if there is a narrative, if let's say I am a person living there and I give you one account of how the church came to be established or how Christianity came to be established here, and you are another Christian living in the same place and you give another information or another set of information or another narrative, then you have contradictory traditions. But what this historian says is, you go to the entire Malabar region and ask them about the succession of Christians and tradition that has come down to them. They will never give you contradictory traditions. And so what he says is that looking at these traditions and the succession of priesthood, and it's so shocking. He says that you go to the priest right now, he'll say, I am the 52nd priest, and he will list you all the 51 priests that were before him of that particular church.
So they have that list.
The list of,
wow,
and so,
that's amazing.
So looking at that tradition, and there are no contradictory traditions that counter this tradition. He says it's it is not unreasonable to believe that the Indian tradition is believable. He says you could believe it. It's credible. It's not unbelievable. It is credible. And you have another historian by the name of J.C. Panjikaran. He says, I have 3 confirmatory things to suggest that Saint Thomas actually came to India. And the first one he says is, out of the 7 churches that Saint Thomas planted, 6 are still standing, and anyone could go and visit. Right, so he's saying that this is not myth or it is not fairy tale. Out of the 7, churches that Saint Thomas planted, which is recorded in history from the 3rd century onwards, you look at all those churches. Out of the 7, 6 are still present. So you could go and straight away witness it for yourself. So that is one confirmation he gives. And the second one he says is that it was the Apostle Thomas's tradition that he picks priests from a particular family. He says 2 families are still alive. That is the lineage of priesthood from a particular family. It's called Sankurial, and that family is still present.
Oh, that's pretty interesting.
And so that's the second confirmation that he gives. And the third confirmation he gives is the characteristics and the attributes of the Saint Thomas Christians that was recorded down. Those characteristics and practices are still being practiced by the Nambudris of the Malabar region. And so you have similarities in lifestyle and practices, religious practices. And so he says, for these 3 reasons, it is believable that the Saint Thomas tradition is true. And so he gives all this evidence to suggest that yes, it is credible, and it is up to the viewer to say, okay, you have all this information now. How much
is more?
Yeah, which is like how much is more, right? Yeah. What is more probable? And one small deviation is found in the Indian tradition and the outside India tradition. The outside India tradition seems to suggest that Saint Thomas might have come to North India first, particularly into the Indo-Greek kingdoms with the king Gondopharos. So they have a tradition. The outside India sources tell us that he might have come to the northwestern part of what was subcontinent India at that time, which included Pakistan and little bit of Afghanistan as well. So the Sindh region. So that is where you have the Indo-Greek kingdoms of the early centuries. So he may have come there, and then later on moved down, and through the Arabian Sea might have landed in Malabar. But the Indian tradition does not tell us anything about the northwestern region, having Saint Thomas. It records of Saint Thomas coming straight away to Karanganur in Malabar region. So you have a slight deviation, and so some scholars might have some sort of difficulty. But I think it's easy to resolve the difference. I wouldn't say it's a contradiction. I would say it's a difference. Both are different. These 2 traditions are not contradictory. They're different. It's just variants. It's like you get, for example, you have a historical event happen right now. Hindu newspaper will record the same event. The Indian Express will also record the same event, but they don't write the same things,
Yeah.
right? And still the event is recorded,
Yeah.
right? So likewise, maybe the Eastern sources, the outside India sources have recorded, the Apostle Thomas going there first, and the Indian tradition may not have bothered about those things,
Yeah.
and may have talked about the Apostle Thomas only in India. So it's not a contradiction. So while some scholars would be hesitant to believe this, most of the scholars today who study Saint Thomas Christianity think that the arrival of the Apostle Thomas in India and his ministry is actually credible. And personally, I too believe that his arrival, his ministry, and his death in India is a credible source of information.
Yeah, I think in Chennai also we have the St. Thomas Mount, where
Yes.
it's it's very predominant.
Yes.
In Chennai, where so this is the mountain where he was praying and he was stabbed
Yes.
from behind. And I also read somewhere, I'm not sure how true it is, but I think it's like St. Thomas came actually looking for the Jews in India. I'm not sure, but I saw like there were some Jewish people living in India in those times, and I think St. Thomas actually came looking for to preach to the Jews, and
Yeah, there is some element of truth to that, because about 1000 BC, when the tribes of Israel were scattered during Solomon's time, some of the Jewish population, they were just scattered all around, and some of them actually came to India. We have historical evidence to suggest that Jews were living in the Malabar region, in the early centuries before Christ and even after Christ, and the Jews were, it was not the migration was not like, okay, you have now one migration, then after 100 years you have another migration. You have this migration taking place gradually. Okay, so there was a considerable amount of Jews in the Malabar region when the Apostle Thomas came, and so it could be that the Apostle Thomas was sent to preach the gospel of Jesus to the Jews living in the Malabar region. But the gospel of Jesus, it is not restricted to only the Jews. It is for the whole.
It is for
whole world.
everybody.
So God had a special concern for India and sent the Apostle Thomas to India.
Yeah, so I think that was one of the main. I think a lot of information that you said regarding the lineages was pretty new and very interesting and exciting for me, because when you said there is one still family that is still living, I think, and 7 out of 6 churches which was uprooted by St. Paul is still, and
St.
we can
Thomas.
go and St. Thomas. Sorry, St. Thomas was we can go and visit over there. I think those kind of things make it more, when some things has happened in history, and then when somebody is saying, "Oh, it's happened in history," you can go there and you can check it out. It's still there.
Yeah.
I think that gives it more credibility.
Yes.
When I go and visit over there and see that's very interesting and exciting part which you said. I think that was one of the main and then when Thomas came, as you were saying, he's he came over there and he was had to I think Thomas was speaking a certain language, and his culture was different, and then Indian people that were living over there in that landmass, either it be Jewish who have adapted to Indian culture, or the Malabar area, they had a different culture. So when Thomas arrived, and there were a lot of native cultures in India that was happening, right? And how did these culture receive the teachings of Saint Thomas, and when he was teaching, or it could be language or be culture, or how did they receive it, and how did they Jesus was understood within the context of India?
Yes.
Jesus as a figure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because as I already told you earlier, this period is called the period of obscurity. It's obscure because we don't have a direct source to tell us what happened about the ministry. We only have information that is written about 180 AD and afterwards, so which is roughly about 130 years after the time of the Apostle Thomas, and so it's called the period of obscurity because we don't know exactly what happened, but based on the writings of the disciples of the Apostle Thomas and their successors, the information that I just shared earlier, some of the conclusions can be made, and we have some archaeological records to support those conclusions. And that is this: that the Saint Thomas Christians, who were then absorbed into Syrian Christianity, the Syrian Christians, started migrating from Persia down to India from the 4th century onwards.
Okay.
So it is evident from their historical records and their writings, and some archaeological records. We have some plates. We have some epigraphical evidence to suggest that as well. That the Saint Thomas Christians were culturally accommodating to the local people. So they had Christianity was looked at as a religion, not anti-culture or anti-local culture or something like that.
Okay.
So a lot of the local practices were assimilated by the Christians. So you could not differentiate in practice between a Christian and a local non-Christian. Okay, and so Christians were looked at as as people of the highest in the caste system. So they were looked at as people who were equal or sometimes equal to the Nambudris themselves, if not the Nambudris, at least the Nayars of the Malabar region. For many reasons. Number one is they had better technology because they come from, the West. They had, better ways of doing agriculture, and they had, when I say better, it is to say that they had innovative ways.
You mean the Syrian people?
The Syrian Christians, They were more used to, having different technologies, and they're bringing in of their technology into agriculture, farming, building waterways, building houses. They were all helpful to the local Indians, and so the local Indians considered these people to be of higher castes.
Because caste was something that is predominant in
the native language. And even the Syrian Christians, who we call the Indian Christians, that is the Thomas Christians, were considered to be people of the higher caste, equal to the Nambudris, if not the Nambudris, at least the Nayars. Okay, and this evidence for this can be seen in the Christian community of the Syrian Christians or the Thomas Christians itself, because even within Syrian Christianity there were two categories. One was considered to be superior and the other was considered to be inferior. The superior people were called the Southists and the inferior people were called the Northists. This is the influence of the local caste system upon Christianity.
This is the first I'm hearing about.
And so it's interesting to note that the Southists are people, the Syrian Christians who intermarry, who marry themselves within their own community, who don't marry the local Indians. So they were considered to be more purer than those Syrian Christians or Thomas Christians who married the local Indians. They were called the Northists. And so, like how you have in the Indian, culture, you have one particular caste being superior and the other being inferior. The Syrian Christians adopted the Indian, cultural practice of the caste system. And if you look at a lot of religious practices like giving prasadam, were practiced in the churches, and you have these Syrian Christians doing not exactly the Homa sacrifice, but using lights, candles, absorbing a lot of Indian cultural and religious practices into them.
But the caste itself was like because in Christianity there's like we don't do something as caste, or we is like God is like God. Jesus died for everybody and he rose from the dead for everybody, and there's salvation for everybody. Is like
exactly. But the all this became an issue only after the Europeans came. Before the Europeans came, most of the Christians, 99% of the Christians were high caste people.
Oh, okay. So it is like if you are a Christian, it was associated with the high
with a
caste.
high caste. So you either
So it was the Christianity itself was divided, was mingled with the caste system that was in the
yes.
local.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
okay,
both
okay.
with the Syrian Christians and the Thomas Christians, most of them were people of the higher castes,
Oh.
and so if you're considered to be people of the higher caste, you don't mingle with the people of the lower caste, and so these Christians, they looked at the caste system as something which is cultural and not religious. That's the distinction that they made.
Oh.
And the Europeans, when they came, even the Europeans, I think we can even talk about this later. Even with the coming of the Europeans, the earlier Europeans who come from a magisterial Protestant denomination looked at caste as though it is cultural and not religious.
Oh.
The later Christian missionaries of the 19th century, they looked at the caste system and they said, no, it is not cultural, it is religious. You cannot take you cannot take caste out of the Indian religion, so to speak. So either you have to reject that religion, in becoming a Christian, you have to reject the caste system. There are no two ways about it. Christianity has got nothing to do with the caste system. But the earlier Christian missionaries, the European missionaries, and the Syrian and Thomas Christians, they looked at the caste system as something cultural. and social. And there is nothing religious about it. And so they, like layers of sand, they just accommodated or assimilated themselves into the caste, and most of them were people of the higher caste. And so the higher caste people don't mingle with the lower caste communities, and so
So they thought this higher caste doesn't mingle with the lower caste as a cultural thing,
as a cultural thing and a
And
social
not as
thing, not as a religious thing.
okay.
And so the Apostle Thomas, all these families that I said in the Malabar region who trace their priesthood all the way back to Saint Thomas, all of them are either Nambudris or equivalent to Nambudris. They are all people of the higher castes.
Oh.
Yeah.
So I think that is one of the main things that I've learned in this conversation now, is that it was like perceived as a cultural thing.
Yes.
And how that caste has been having a hold on the religious, the ideology of Christ,
Yes.
for everybody, that God is free for all. I think that has been huge eye-opening thing that I had this in conversation right now. But it makes sense logically if we see what is the situation right now even in Kerala. I don't want to point out any specific areas, but when we see the geography, where caste has taken a hold on, I think it is makes a lot of sense with what you said, and the ideology, the history that you have presented right now. It kind of makes more logical sense in that way. So yeah, I think that was a very eye-opening conversation that we had right now. And but also going through something called Nestorianism, as an idea. And I was just looking up and I was surfing about it, and can you share more about that idea and what is Nestorianism, and you can just elaborate on what it actually is, and how much influence that it had on Christianity in India. It's if you could just shed some light on that, it will be really helpful.
Yeah. Nestorius was actually a bishop in the city of Constantinople. Now, Constantinople was the new capital of the Roman Empire.
Okay.
And the Pope, the Emperor of the Roman society lived in Constantinople. The capital was moved from Rome to Constantinople by the Emperor Constantine. And so in the region of Constantinople, the bishop in that particular time, we're talking about 428 AD. So in 428 AD, a person by the name of Nestorius was appointed the bishop in Constantinople, and he in one of his messages, in one of his sermon, he brought about this idea, or he began to challenge a popular notion within Christianity about Mary, the mother of Jesus, right? And the idea was to say, what was popularly known as Theotokos. In Greek, Theotokos means mother of God. So Mary was considered the mother of God. That was sort of the natural understanding within the church. And Nestorius challenged that idea for the very first time. The new idea that Nestorius was bringing in was to say that at conception, Virgin Mary conceived only the human Jesus and not the divine word of God, or not the logos, the word that we call it. And the reason why he wanted to tell that is because when the church wanted to call Mary the mother of God, what they failed to do was to talk about the humanness of Jesus. Right? Jesus was very much a human as much as he was God. That is, he was completely or truly human and truly God. What Nestorius saw in the traditional sense was that you're making Jesus look only divine. But what about the humanness of Jesus? Did Jesus suffer and die as a human? Okay, because only then you can say, okay, he's me. I am a human. Jesus was a human. He suffered like I am suffering today. And so Nestorius wanted to bring about the humanness of Jesus as much as he wanted to bring about the divine Jesus. But by doing that, what he wanted to say was that Jesus at conception, when he was conceived in the womb of Mary, was only human. And then divinity was added to it. It's like the divinity of Jesus is like a coat that Jesus put on. So he's both divine and human. But the already established idea of Mary and Christology, that is the study of the doctrine of Jesus, at that particular point in time was to suggest that yes, Jesus is completely God and he's completely human. But the human nature and the divine nature, they both mix together to form one single nature. That was the traditional idea at that point in time. So you have one nature in one person. Jesus is the person. And what is his nature? It is a mixture of divine and human nature. And Nestorius is challenging that idea and he's saying, no. Jesus had two natures, not one nature. He's having two natures, both human and divine, which are distinct. They don't intermingle like how you people say. So he's also human, he's also God. He's not like, when you have ink and you have water, assume ink is the divine nature and water is the human nature. When you mix the ink with water, you have a new component. That becomes a single nature. And Nestorius is saying, no, that is not right. Because it fails to bring about the water in the new component. So he's saying the water and ink, remain to be in one person, but they don't intermingle. That is how you can say Jesus was completely divine and completely human. Right? And this is basically the idea of Nestorianism, and he was rejected at the Council of Ephesus, which took place in 431 AD. He was rejected. But the problem was, in the subsequent years, even his main debater, who was Cyril of Alexandria, his ideas about the natures of Christ intermingling was also rejected. Because Jesus, the natures of two natures of Jesus are complete and true. They don't intermingle to form a new nature. If that is the case, it sort of becomes like some of the gods we have in Hinduism, right? Where you have the divine nature and human nature forming a hybrid god. Right, it's like the Zeus or like goddess Indra, the goddess of thunder or something like that. So you have a new kind of god, and so the church condemned even Cyril of Alexandria, who was the opposite person to Nestorius. So Nestorianism was also condemned by the church, and Cyril of Alexandria's opinion, which was then called, his view was called the monophysite tradition, which is to say mono means one, physis in Greek means nature. So one nature. One nature was condemned. The church accepted the two natures that Nestorius proposed, but they rejected the separateness that Nestorius presented. And this is how it influenced India. So this is all this is taking place in Constantinople, in the Middle Eastern region. But what happened was, when Christianity spread to the east, the Christian, I wouldn't say denomination because there was no denomination at that point in time, but the Christological perspective of Jesus, the church that had this Nestorian Christological perspective, basically we're talking about the Syrian Christians now, they brought their Nestorian idea of Jesus into India. Remember, we talked about the Syrian migration to India, the Syrian Christian migration to India. When the Syrian Christians migrated to India, they had a Nestorian perspective of Jesus. And so they came here, and the kind of Christianity they practiced, was sort of slightly different from the Western church, the Roman church that we're talking about. And when the Europeans, when the Portuguese came, the first of the major colonialists, when the Portuguese came, they were startled to see so many Christians in India. And they were very, very happy. They say, okay, we found Christian brothers. But as they continue to grow in their relationship with each other, they very quickly learned that these people are practicing a Christianity which was slightly different. And that is, they don't accept the Pope as their authority. They don't accept the Roman Catholic, or they don't accept the Roman creeds, so to speak, particularly talking about Nestorianism. And they said, okay, you are Christians, but we don't think you are right. So what you'll have to do is either you'll have to change and convert to Roman Catholicism, or if you want to stay away from us, we will leave you and we will not consider you to be a part of Christianity itself. And that was a point in time when the Syrian and the Indian Christians, before the European Christians came, they had to make a decision. So the Roman Catholic Church was trying to exert their power upon the small group of people. Of course, the number is huge. We're talking about lakhs here, lakhs and lakhs of Christians, not much, but lakhs. Okay. If you want to say it is small, it is small. If you want to say it is large, it is large. But from the context of early Christianity, it is big. But from the Roman Catholic perspective, their church is an established one already. By the 1500s, they are so huge already. The whole of Western Europe is Catholic.
Roman Catholics.
So from their perspective, this was a small group. And they said, you are believing, you don't want to consider Pope to be your authority. You don't want to follow our sacramental system. You are not even following our liturgy. Remember, these people, these Syrian Christians, their liturgy was Syriac and not Latin. But for the Roman Catholics, if you don't, if your liturgy is not in Latin, it is a sin. Right? And so, although they looked at these people as Christians, they thought that these people are a heretical form of Christianity. And so, that is how, the Nestorians have influenced Indian Christians. But then a lot of the early Syrian Christians, when the Catholics came, some of them said, okay, we think we are wrong, and so we'll join with you. But some said, no, we will not join with you. You cannot dominate us. We can consider you to be Christians, but you cannot control us. We don't want to say, the authority of the church lies in the Pope or something like that. They wanted to be separate. And so you had, sort of denominations break up. Within Indian Christians, in India. So that's how Nestorianism came into India, and it had a hard time, with the Catholics who came in the form of the Portuguese missionaries, the Jesuits.
So that was very interesting, Nestorianism, how it had an influence on, so the breakup of denominations. But I think you mentioned, I think this also had some sort of a connection when, the Europeans came. So there are a lot of different colonial powers that came, like British, Portuguese, French, and, and they had some part in playing a lot of things. So when they arrived, so how did they reshape Christianity? As you were talking about, they were talking and they were trying to take the identity from, that was one of the topics that you were talking about. Apart from that, what are the other things where how did they reshape Christianity in India, and how did they see the local tradition and practices?
So we cannot make a blanket statement and say all, if you're saying, let's say the British, all the British missionaries were like this, and all the Portuguese missionaries were like that. So even within the British missionaries there were differences, even within the Portuguese missionaries there were differences. So I would just like to highlight two things here. And the first thing is, with the coming of the Portuguese in the 1500s, the latter part of the 15th century, and by the 1500s, the Roman Catholicism in India began to rise drastically because of these Portuguese missionaries. Now, they had a very, very, very different attitude towards other religions, right? And that is this, that we as Christians, we have the true religion and you are all false. And so Jesus has asked us to, make disciples of all of you. And we are asked to convert you. And so the Portuguese missionaries, the earlier Portuguese missionaries, began to involve or engage themselves in active, forceful conversion. Okay, and it's interesting to note, I would just like to read to you the first provincial council that took place in Goa, which was the capital of the Portuguese territory. This is what they said in the first provincial. Basically, before I just pull it up, what they did was, they just destroyed in the whatever temples and mosques were there in the Portuguese region. They just destroyed it. They said, if you want to live in this area, you become a Christian, or you get out of this place. So wherever
they took control of that place, and they kind of eradicated the rest.
So if you want to be a Hindu in the Portuguese territory, you have to live as a second class citizen. That is, pay extra
taxes.
That's the religious tax. Right? Or you get out of that place. And so you had migrations, based upon religion. So Hindus living in the Portuguese area, we're talking about this coastal region, both in the Malabar region and in the Coromandel region. So most of these places were occupied by the Portuguese, people. And so you had this forceful conversion take place at that particular point in time. So I would just like to read to you some of the decisions that were taken in the council. This council took place in 1567. The first thing is, the Muslims were ordered to live apart from the Christians. So Muslims should move away, and there should not be any social intercourse between the Christians and the non-Christians. These were the decisions made by the council. Okay.
The Portuguese council.
Yeah, the Portuguese council. Okay. Then the Christians should not take part in the celebrations like wedding of even their relatives if they are still non-Christians. So if as a Christian, if you want to take part in the wedding of your own brother or a sister who is not a Christian, then you don't have that permission. Okay. So that forces the non-Christian to become a Christian, or this person to become a non-Christian and leave that place. Right? And then the Christians should not avail themselves of the services of the non-Christian physicians. That means if there is a non-Christian physician, the Christians should not avail the benefit of visiting that doctor. Right? These were decisions taken at the first provincial council. The Christians should be given privileged positions in the state, and no public office can be entrusted to the non-Christians. So if you want to work in the Portuguese government or in whatever role they have in the office, you should be a Christian. If you're a non-Christian, you're not given that privilege.
Now, these things applied also to the Syriac and the Thomas Christians?
Yes. If you are living in the Portuguese area, it applied.
So even if you are claimed as a Thomas Christian or a Syriac Christian, you have to convert into a Roman Catholic to avail these benefits.
If you don't want, we will leave you aside, but then you can't get any benefits out of it.
Okay.
And then, on receiving baptism, the Christians should change their names and their lifestyle, including their dress.
This is where the changing of name comes from. I was wondering when people, when I recently took baptism, it's like, did you change your name? I was like, why I should change my name? So I was like wondering where this changing of name came from.
The early Christians, the Syrian Christians and Thomas Christians didn't change their name at all. Most of their names were high caste names.
Okay.
The changing of names actually came with the Portuguese coming into, and their form of Christianity was Roman Catholic. This is not to say bad about the Roman Catholic Church. Of course, as I said, even within the Portuguese Christians, not everyone were the same. You see, a few years later, one of the greatest missionaries ever to set foot on Indian soil, Francis Xavier. He was a Roman Catholic, right? Yeah. The amount of change he brought to the Roman Catholic Church and evangelism was very, very different. His evangelistic method was completely different. He never agreed with these methods. And so, not all Catholics.
St. Francis Xavier, the church which is in Goa.
Goa, yes.
Wow,
exactly.
Always visited that church.
Yeah. The amount of evangelistic efforts he put in was tremendous. Much different from the earlier.
What they claim to be.
Yeah. And then see, let me read to you other decisions they made at the council. Heavy tax should be imposed upon non-Christians. Temples should be demolished and pagan cults should be forbidden. Wow. Okay, and women on receiving baptism has claim on 50% of the family property. That was another decision, interesting one. And all pagan priests should be banished from the Portuguese territory. Books and relics of Islam should be confiscated and burnt at the customs. Right? The Hindus are not permitted to make any contribution to build their temples, even outside the Portuguese territory. Even that influence was sort of going on.
Wow.
So the idea
extreme.
is that Christianity should be propagated at all cost. That was their goal, because they thought they're doing something divine, that God, wanted them to do it. Right, but this is a complete misunderstanding of what Jesus wanted to say.
That's what like as you were saying, I'm getting reminded of how Jesus lived his life and what he claimed to be, but it's like completely different. This is all there was so much forceful things, situation that were put up, either you do this or you are out of the land, something.
And 100 years later, you will see a completely different approach, a Roman Catholic approach, which was not accepted by all the Roman Catholic, fathers and priests, but majority of them agreed, and some of it is still practiced today.
You mean during the time of St. Francis Xavier?
Yeah, after like about, let's say, 80 years after Francis Xavier,
okay,
comes another Italian father by the name of Robert D Nobili. Now, he introduced a completely different evangelistic form.
Okay.
Right? He said he came to Madurai. Right? He was posted at Madurai.
During the colonial time?
If you call the Portuguese colonialists, of course they are.
Yeah.
Yes. So, we're talking about the 1600s now.
Okay.
Robert D Nobili comes to Madurai, and Madurai is sort of one of the leading cities of the Nayak kingdoms. Right?
Yeah.
So they were ruled by the Nayaks, and Madurai is also a very religious place, full of temples, and Hindu philosophy was at its peak in Madurai. Okay, and so there is already Portuguese, Roman Catholic evangelism going on there, but only the lower caste communities were Christians.
Okay.
So Robert D Nobili comes, he sits and he looks at the church and he says, this is not Christianity. And he says, how can I bring these upper caste Hindus to follow Christ? Right? He says, Christianity is not simply about bringing a small lower caste community person who's not having any dress to the church. It is about bringing these religious non-Christians to the church as well. So what should we do? Then he says that we should accommodate to their, not only their lifestyle, but also to their religious and cultural beliefs. And so what he does, accommodate as in, change your lifestyle, change your dressing, change your eating habits, and follow their, beliefs, cultural beliefs, as much as to accommodate Christ to them. So what he did was it's called the method of accommodation, or it is called the ministry of accommodation, where you take Christ and you accommodate Christ to the beliefs and practices of the culture.
Okay.
So he looks at the Madurai culture and he says, let's bring Christ, put him straight into the culture. So what does that mean? It means that a Christian should take off all his Western robes. Remember, he's a European. He's an Italian aristocrat. He comes from an aristocratic family. He gives up all his wealth. He becomes a Roman Catholic missionary. He comes to Madurai. And there he says, I'm going to take off all my Western robes and put on the sannyasi dress. That is the orange dress. Okay, just a single piece of cloth around his body. And then his eating habits completely changed, just one meal a day. Right? And then he lived exactly like, a Hindu sannyasi. Practicing the caste system, practicing all the basic Brahminical lifestyle. That is, have a hair tuft.
Oh, okay.
Okay, put on the sacred cord, right? And put on the traditional sandal paste around the body and do the ceremonial washings, the bathing, all the ceremonial stuff. But what Robert D Nobili does is he replaces the mantras and the slokas by the biblical verses.
By praying and reading the
Yeah,
Bible.
so he does the homam, he does whatever they do, but instead of doing those Sanskrit mantras and slokas, he takes verses from the Bible and he says it. So he gives, he gives new, perspective on how to understand the local things. He says, why do you want to change his name? Why do you want to change the religious stuff? If they want to say prayers around the fire, let them do it. All you do is now you replace those gods and the mantras with the biblical verses and replace the God with Jesus.
Oh.
So you accommodate Christ to them. So this is also the same, Portuguese Padroado system that you call it, that we earlier talked about, the decision that was made in first provincial. Completely different method. Right?
Oh yeah, this is very. It's even hard to imagine.
Yes, and so you have. So what Robert D Nobili does is, in Madurai you have a church for the lower caste, you have a church for the upper caste. So
the caste system is still there.
Oh yeah, and he completely.
It's like he also got into the culture. It is a cultural thing and not a religious thing.
Yes. He said if you want to become a Christian, you don't have to, throw off your, all your outside markers. You can come to Christ with all your outside markers.
Oh.
And that method just took off in Madurai.
Oh.
Lots of Brahmins became Christians. Oh. Most of the Brahmin family you find in Madurai who are Christian today, there is a huge number. Most of them trace their roots to Robert D Nobili's method of accommodation, and after him also you find Constanti Beski, whom we call Virama Munivar, right? John Brito, all these people used the ministry of accommodation and converted and brought lots of higher caste communities from South Tamil Nadu, Madurai, Tirunelveli, Tuticorin and Kanyakumari. But Kanyakumari is a little different because again the conversion of most of these fishermen community in the Kanyakumari region happened before Robert D Nobili came, even before Francis Xavier.
Oh, okay.
Right, that was a little different, and there was forceful conversion too. The Paravas, how did they become Christian? In fact, in one day 2,000 families became Christian. And the reason was that they were fishermen and they had hard time with the Arabian Muslim fishermen who were trying to control the region. Through the Arabian Sea, the Arabs came in, they did business.
Okay.
That was affecting the local Hindu fishermen, right? And so they were basically saying, we need help. And so they approached the Roman Catholics, the Portuguese. They said, will you please help us? And then the Roman Catholics said, if you want us to help you, you should convert to Christianity.
Oh my God.
So they said, we will give you protection. We will protect you from these Arabian sailors and merchants and business people, but you have to become Christian. And one day you had 2,000 Paravas becoming Christians. They all became Roman Catholics. And you see Robert D Nobili's method, completely different. He says, if you see something in the temple, use that as a method to, accommodate Christ. Right? Change the words, just change the God, and you're fine. Right? So we don't have a single uniform method of evangelism. Now here I'm not saying one is correct and one is wrong.
Yeah,
I'm just laying out the different evangelistic.
Like, we are also not in a situation where, right now in this situation 2025, when we say this to somebody, I think we can also not judge them based on what they did.
Yes.
I cannot put a label what they did is right or wrong, or the method that they used, because right now if you ask somebody as a Christian who believes, if somebody is trying to do that, it would not seem right.
Yeah.
It would seem like, no, this is not the ways is, it's not the way. But thinking back, way back then, thinking about the peak of, the cultural, the peak of culture in India, and compared to all those things, I think I cannot judge them also based on this, even if, like, right now it sounds differently. Uh, but then, yeah, I think as you were like talking about the Christianity and how it shaped in the southern part, in the northern part, after all this is what the British came, right?
Yeah, the British were there from the 1600s, but they did not come as British. They came as as a business company. It was
Business
called
company.
the English East India Company.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
I remember history.
so they came as a like a company doing business. So they wanted to take the raw materials from India, make it into complete or finished goods, and then sell them back to either the Europeans or to the Indians themselves. So the Indians, had to give away some of their raw materials for a cheaper rate, and they had to buy their own, product sometimes for a higher cost. And so that was sort of the, money laundering that the company did. So which is something that is not very biblical.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that is not biblical.
Yeah, but the English
that is how they came to India.
So the British also, again, they were of different denominations. The Anglicans, they had a particular perspective of the culture. The Baptists, with the William Carey, Marshman, and Ward, missionaries like them, had a completely different perspective of the Indian culture. So 19th century is where things started to get very rough. Between the Indian society and the Western missionaries. I'll say latter half of the second part of the 1800s. So that is when things got very rough, when the culture and Indian religion was sort of criticized. So yeah, maybe we can talk about it later. But yeah, so
so I think but. Another thing, all this colonial part, we were like having conversation. They were like, you said different types was booming. Some were doing this, some were doing that, and some had some other intention. And another doubt that I was having, and I think most of the people will also have, like, during the spread of during this colonialism, there was a spread of Christianity. Was it primarily about faith, or do you think that faith was exploited by the colonial powers for their gain?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's hard one also, because this is my understanding of the entire colonial period regarding what you just asked, and that is this: we have to separate the imperialists from the missionaries.
Okay.
That is, we will have to separate the people who came to do business and gain wealth in India from the missionaries. So all the imperialists and the colonialists are not missionaries, right?
Okay.
The missionaries, although they were British or even Europeans, had a completely different agenda when compared to the imperialists and the colonialists.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay.
Just as an example, think about William Carey. He was a British missionary. He was not even allowed inside the country by the British authorities. They said, don't come inside. Their main goal was business and trying to drain as much wealth as they can in India. The missionaries came for a different purpose. The problem is, a lot of the Indians today, misunderstand these two groups. They dump both the missionaries and the colonialists into the same bucket. They were different. The colonialists did not like the missionaries because they thought these missionaries are spoiling the business in India.
Because saying the colonialists didn't like the missionaries.
They didn't like the missionaries.
Oh, okay.
They didn't like the missionaries. And so let me read to you the decisions made by the English East India Company. When they began to take over or do some business in India. Let me just pull it up. Because there's some 4 or 5 points that is very, very crucial. One of the first things that they did was to say that we will help the local Indians build their temples. We'll give money to them. Let them build their temples. And also they said, some Europeans have to assist them in helping build the temples. Okay, that is number one decision, that they made. So a large number of temples were brought under their management, and they helped rebuild and repair the temples. Salaries were given for the priest. That is, the colonialists were giving money to the priests to take care of the church, to take care of the temple, and for all the temple renovation work
done by the
colonialists. It's in their policy, East India Company's policies. Anyone can look it up. So that was one of their first decisions. Secondly, the company opposed Christian missionary work. No missionary work should be done. Starting from 1600s.
This is the first time hearing.
Yes, this is the policies of the East India Company. That is the English East India Company.
Oh,
okay. They were very strict in saying that no Christian missionary work should happen. And the reason is, if Christian missionary work happened, their business would be affected with the Hindus. So not only are they giving money to the Hindus to build their own temples and to flourish, they're saying, Christians, if you want to come into India as missionaries, your visas will be rejected.
Oh.
Okay, and things go even more interesting, right? The company refused to employ native Christians. So if I am an Indian and I become a Christian, the company will not give job to me.
Oh,
which means I should not become a Christian.
This is completely opposite to what I have been thinking for so much time.
If you are a native Christian, no job for you, no government job for you. So if you want government job, if you want to work for the British, if you want to be salaried, if you want to be wealthy, you should not become a Christian. If you become a Christian, we will not give job to you. That is the company policy.
Oh, this is pretty
right? Okay. And then there is one more thing. Okay. That if you want to be a part of the army, Indian army, you should not be a Christian. Right? This is the East India policy. If you want to be it was not India at that point in time. It was like, if you want to, be in the army of the East India, because they were waging, they were all small princely states at that point in time, right? Small kingdoms, right? So, and the Mughal Empire had already, established themselves, and so the British had to fight a big war against these sultans, these smaller sultans. Right? And if you want to fight in their army, you actually get a lot of benefits. And so a lot of Indians wanted to be a part of the army. Right? In the military. But if you want to be a part of the military, you can't be a Christian. Right? That is the policy of the East India Company. Now, only in the 1800s, the East India Company metamorphosized itself into the British government. The East India Company becomes the British government. The British government directly takes over, the business and everything.
Okay.
It takes over it completely, and the workers in the East India Company are salaried employees. Okay, they are no longer the big shots. They become workers under the British government. But until then, even after the British government takes over, it was not easy for the missionaries. Right? Only after William Carey under the banner of the Danish mission began to do his work. Right? He lived in Malda and Serampur in West Bengal.
Okay.
Right? There is where he went and started doing his ministry. That is a Danish settlement. It is not a British settlement. The British government did not encourage evangelism at all. And then William Carey, after he does all the work, right? He does his evangelism. He tries to transform the community. And on looking at the fruits of William Carey's mission, the British government in 1813, decides to say, okay, now we'll allow missionaries, because there is so much of work to be done in India. The community there needs our help. William Carey and his people, they had a hard time in the British Parliament, right, to convince the authorities to say, are you Christians really? What are you doing in India? Right? What you're doing in India is abhorrent. And then those people have a change of heart, and even then they allow British missionaries and even other European and American missionaries to come, but the business agenda was still not gone. They still had the business agenda.
The business agenda was still there.
Yes, the business agenda was still there.
The one which was established during the East India
Company. But it was not as harsh as it was earlier. You could do evangelism and ministry, but don't as much as possible, don't spoil our business also. So that is when the missionaries began to arrive in the 19th century. You call the 19th century the age of missions. That is when the European and American missionaries spread to all parts of the what we call the majority world now. South America, Africa, India, and other parts of Southeast Asia. Missionaries started to flood to these places, and it is after that the Indian population began to find it very difficult with the missionaries. But until then, not much of an issue, except during this Portuguese time, a little bit of here and there.
But they also, when the missionaries came, what was their method? What was their style of missionary? Was it like mostly? But so their intent was to truly was from a faith perspective, I think. And then how did they approach? Was it like genuine change of heart was there? Because see, what I believe personally is that I can tell about Christ, or I can tell about something to anybody how much ever I want. It is only if they have a true change in heart, if they actually want to have a change, they will accept it and they will believe and they will have this change. So at that time, when the times of missionaries was like happening, how was the scenario over there? And another thing is like, how did this education and hospital, because I think that played a huge part in India.
Yes.
In terms of education and in terms of hospitality, like
Yes.
hospital, and what was the scenario at that time? What was happening?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The evangelistic methods, as I told you, the different Europeans had different approaches.
Yes.
But the 19th century approach was very, very powerful. Right? They had 5 major functions or objectives. Number one was to preach the gospel to as many people as possible. Right? But if you preach the gospel, that is number one, how will you help them grow in Christ? Right? You preach the gospel, I preach the gospel to you, you receive Christ. Now, how will you grow in your faith? You need education. You need to read the Bible. Right? But how will you read the Bible? You don't know how to read and write. So the missionaries said, every church must have a school next to them. So all the small children come to school. Because you need to read the Bible. But if you need to read the Bible, you need to study.
But the school was for all.
School was for all.
Okay.
School was for all. And I'll come to that. Okay. So you have a school. So children are put at school. They begin to study. They begin to read the Bible. Okay. Now their faith is growing in Christ. Okay. Now your faith is growing in Christ. But how would you eat? I cannot keep giving you money every day.
Yeah.
So they said, you should know, or you should have some sort of a skill to stand on your own legs. Do something. So they have education, and different kinds of education was given. Vocational training, research training. So vocational is like you can be a plumber, you can be a builder. And so these schools had, there were different kinds of schools. You want to be a doctor, you want to be a vocational painter, or a builder, or a carpenter, whatever it is. So that training was also given, so that the Christian, once he begins to read the word of God, he is not only flourished in his soul, but also in his body by getting work. Right? Now, if you know a trade, you can start your own business. So the missionaries, what they wanted to do was first preach the gospel, help them read the word of God and grow in Christ themselves. For that you need education. So education comes into the picture. And then lifestyle. You need a better lifestyle. You cannot simply keep roaming in the roads here. For that you need jobs. Right? So you develop some skill. You gain in the skill. Now once you do that, next you become either a person who evangelizes or supports evangelism. Right? And then the cycle keeps going on. Church was not a place where you simply come, you sit and spend the rest of your retirement age in the same church. What you were supposed to do was you come inside the church, reap the benefits of the whatever the missionaries are giving. But then once you are established, when you can stand on your own legs, go out. The word go was very, very important for these missionaries of the 19th century. Go. right? And then you do repeat the same thing. And that is how all these Christian evangelistic organizations that came up after the Britishers went, they had the same principle. So wherever they went, they started schools and building hospitals. Now hospitals was the next one. So you have people to stand on their own legs. But what if they are sick? Because the traditional Indian medicine, the higher caste people would not treat the lower caste people, right?
So they made hospitals for all.
Hospitals for all. And so an example is that of CMC, Christian Medical College. Ida Scudder comes, she looks at the situation there. The plight of the people there were very, very difficult, right? They could not afford women doctors. So she begins, she goes and studies medical, she goes to medical college, comes back and starts a hospital. So until the middle of the 20th century, 99% of the nurses in India were all Christians. There were no non-Christian nurses until 1950, right? So you had, Christianity developed this, a new approach. I wouldn't say a new approach, a different approach to the earlier ones. Of course, the Roman Catholics had hospitals, and they were, at the next level of hospitality and service, because they clearly believed that serving God is actually serving people, right? And so this hospitality and all of that was ingrained within the gospel. So what is the gospel? It is not simply saying Jesus is God, believe him. It is transforming the life of the person. So the life of the person from within changes. So he has a completely different perspective of life. That is not only be enriched spiritually, that is to walk in the fruits of the Spirit, but also in life, right? Whatever you do it all to the glory of God. That sort of attitude must come to every Christian. That was sort of the idea. And like how these generally talked about, this conversion was so rampant and stuff like that. See, even today, at least according to the 2011 census, only 2.3% is Christian. So it is not that every person became a Christian. People were opposing the message despite receiving benefits. The schools that were open, it were for all. The hospitals that were open were for all. And it was not like every person coming to the hospital saying, okay, if you don't believe in Jesus, you will die. If you believe in Jesus, Jesus will heal you and you become a Christian.
It's not you get converted, I will treat you.
It
was for everybody.
It was for everyone. If they didn't believe in Jesus, fine. But the majority Indians are trying to give a picture that, okay, there was this forceful conversion going on throughout the history. No, if that was the case, today 80% of Indians would be Christians.
Should be Christian,
But I think it is hardly 3%. And the census was not taken this 2021. It was supposed to be taken, but for political reasons it was not taken. But if it was taken, I think it would still be under 5% only. Maybe even there are lots of secret Christians. Maybe we cannot predict the right information. But certainly it is not more than 10% or 15%. No way.
But I think that was one of very interesting thing that you said is like, they built churches, and as we were having this conversation, I could clearly have a distinguish between the, missionaries and the imperialists.
That is the most important thing.
The most important, because we, the conversation that we have with our friends, with other people, where it comes up where, we put everything in a bucket. As you were saying, we were like put everything in a bucket. The colonialism is rapid. And another very logical thing that you said is if there was a forceful conversion happening throughout the history, more than 50 to 80% should be Christian in India right now. If there was forceful conversion, and it is hardly 2 or 3% that we know right now. And I think. Because what I have heard from, even from non-believers, there's like one Christianity, what they did amazing thing to India is like, education and hospitals. Because as we were having this conversation, as you said, this education was for all. Everybody needs to have a skill. Everybody needs to know to read and write. And I think that was one of the main, and I think the missionaries had a very clear belief that there shouldn't be a caste system.
Yeah.
And as I was reading through all of this data, roughly around, I think this Hindu part has a caste system within this culturally, which is, as you were saying, a lot of people agreed as a cultural thing. Um, then there was like, this Hindu, all this thing is going on. Christianity is like colonialism, all is like coming up, everything is like happening. And then when we move from, there were like some reforms that happened, after the spread, there was like missionaries, as you were saying. I think, how did those Hindu reforms, and how did the Hindu reform movements react to the spread of Christianity? Like, how did it spread?
That's a very good question. Now, with the 19th century, as I said, it is called the age of the missions. Now, in response to all of this that is happening, there were responses, right? So because of the evangelism that's happening, and additionally also the Europeans also begin to learn about the Indian religion, right? The Indian social practices, the Indian religion. And so based upon all of this, based upon what the British did, based upon the English East India Company, based upon the Protestant missions and all of this, there were three kind of responses that came out. The first one was called the compromise movements that came out of this.
Okay.
So what these movements tried to do was to say, okay, we're getting in all these Western ideas. Okay. European rationalism, you're getting in Christianity. All of these are very, very, very important to reform ourselves. So what they did was they said, we can take all the good things from Christianity. We can take good things from secularism, from the European rationalism. Let's take all these good things and use it to change some of the bad things in Hinduism. Like, for example, some of the social evils, like the practice of sati, the practice of female infanticide, the practice of human sacrifice and animal sacrifice, the practice of untouchability. Let's all do away with all these evil things that are inherently present in some of our practices. So these movements are called compromise movements. They compromise some of the Hindu religious and cultural beliefs and practices to accommodate Christian principles and secular principles and values. So they say these compromise movements, for example, like the Brahmo Samaj, started by Raja Ram Mohan Rai. He was heavily influenced by the missionaries, right? He loved Jesus so much, or he liked Jesus so much that he, in order to study the writings of Jesus, he studies Greek. Right? He studies the New Testament, he studies Greek, he reads the New Testament in Greek, and he writes this wonderful book called The Precepts of Jesus, The Guide to Peace and Happiness. He says, if you want peace and happiness, the primary person to go to is Jesus. Right? He was influenced by Jesus so much that he basically said that if you want Hinduism, right, you take away all the ethical values that Hinduism teach and you accept Christianities. So you take in the ethics of Christianity, you take in the concept of God from Islam, right, and you keep only a little portion of Hinduism, which is the writings of the Upanishads. So he said, even he said, you don't have to believe in the Puranas and the Itihasas, and even the Vedas. He said, we don't need the Vedas. We only need the Upanishads. And he wanted Hinduism to embrace ideas from Islam, from Christianity, from secularism, and be a Hindu. So these movements are called the compromise movements.
Okay.
And even his successors like Debendranath Tagore, that is Rabindranath Tagore's father, and then Keshav Chandra Sen, all these people are examples of compromise movement people who loved the European information, whether it's religious or non-religious, and adapt it to Hinduism and modify Hinduism based upon that information. Right? Okay. And so Brahmo Samaj is one, Pratna Samaj is one. Then even within Brahmo Samaj, then again there were lots of categories like Adi Brahmo Samaj, Sadharan Brahmo Samaj. You had lots of flavors, but then all of them were very strong in saying that Hinduism needs reformation. You need to throw away things that are bad and evil in Hinduism and accept the Christian perspective on that. And you can still be a Hindu. Right? So these were the first category of movements called the compromise movements. And then the second category is what we call the orthodox movements. Now these people are saying, okay, you as a Christian, you as a secular person, or you as a Muslim, you come to me. What I will do is I will say no to you, and I will try to go back to my source and tell that we are better. Right? So when Christianity comes, when the evangelism takes place, because of the Protestant missions, because of what the British did, and because of the knowledge they have about their own literature, the second group of the second category of movements are saying that we don't need your Christianity, we don't need your Islam, we don't need secularism, we don't need communism. All these good teachings are there in Hinduism already. But what happened to Hinduism? It got corrupted because of history. So as history moved on, it got corrupted. And this Hinduism is the corrupted version. So it's the practice of sati, female infanticide, all this is a corruption of Hinduism. So if you go back to the source, which is the Vedas, you will find the pure form of Hinduism. So you don't need a Christian to teach me about compassion. You go read the Vedas. So in response to all this evangelism and all this European stuff.
So this was happening simultaneously at the same time.
Same time. So we are talking about the 1870s, 1880s. For example, is the Arya Samaj. It was a response to Brahmo Samaj. Brahmo Samaj said, accept Christianity, take the good things from it, modify Hinduism, make Hinduism a universal religion where it accepts all faiths. Then you have an organization like Arya Samaj come up and say, no, how can you give up so easily? No, Hinduism is very pure. Look at all these Christians. See, those people are, are oppressing us. We are slaves and they are masters. How can you accept their religion? See how much violence they have done throughout history. How can I accept your religion? Look at my religion, how pure it is. It is vegetarianism. It is, it is peace-loving. It is non-violent. All of that is in the Vedas. You are looking at a Hinduism which is, corrupted. Right? And so this movement, these kinds of movements like the Ramakrishna Mission, Arya Samaj, and then the disciple of Ramakrishna, it is Vivekananda. All these people are basically trying to create a version of Hinduism which says all these practice of caste system, all this is not true Hinduism. The true Hinduism can be found in the Vedas. Go back to the Vedas. So the watchword for an organization like Arya Samaj is to say, go back to the Vedas. You go back to the Vedas. You are looking at they even reject the Puranas, the Itihasa. They say the evil things or the bad things you see what in Hinduism is from these Puranas and all these things. You can reject it. Don't need the Puranas. Why are you following the Puranas? You go back to the Vedas. That is the true religious stuff. So these are second kind of movements. The third kind of movements is called the Hindu reform movements, which actually takes the beliefs of the Western society. They apply to Hinduism, but they don't give credit to Christianity. Like the Brahma Samaj. The Brahma Samaj is saying, these are wonderful things in Christianity. Let's take them. But in Hinduism, now you have something called the New Age movement, which you call this is the third kind of category, which says
that is happening now, or
it's happening now. It's 19th, 20th century, starting with the 1800s with Vivekananda. After Vivekananda, in the 1900s, you have Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, transcendental meditation, and all these people. They're beginning in a new, or we call it the neo-Hinduism, which is basically the New Age movement. It is basically to say, even now you have people like, Yogi, the person who's in Coimbatore, Sadhguru. And then you have, Maharishi, in is very famous, I forgot his name. So these people are bringing in a sort of new way of looking at Hinduism, where you say that, inherently, the human is not evil and sinful. Christianity teaches that human by nature is evil. But human by nature is actually divine. right? So if you want to look for God, don't look up or don't look outside. You look inside. Okay, so and then basically giving sort of allusions to some of the ancient traditional texts to support that. But basically they are not they're not holding on to any text, religious text. But basically the idea is to say look for the divine within you, because you are fundamentally divine. And when we come to know that, you will have found the freedom. That is the moksha. So a new way of Hinduism, a new you call it neo-Hinduism, or now you call it New Age movement or something like that. So these were three different ways in which the Hindus actually reacted. One was compromise, the other was reject, or you call it orthodox, and the other was to accept the ideas but give it a different look. But the principles were, most of the principles were Western principles. Yeah. Okay. Rejecting some Christian ideas, but predominantly, using them to respond to the Christians themselves. Yeah.
So yeah, I think the new, the three parts that you said, I was like, it was very nice, to have this distinguish between how they reacted.
Yes.
And the last part which you said, I think that we can see right now.
Yes.
That is, predominantly where every people that I meet, and a lot of people that we know is like, have adapted to this new type of thing. Where,
and with the ruling government, it is more like the middle one also. You have, because the RSS comes from the movement. The RSS movement has its history from the Arya Samaj itself. You have so it is an orthodox movement saying, we are Indians and we are Hindus, sort of an idea. So you can trace that to the orthodox movement. But as you said, you have this new age movement also, very, very predominant.
Predominantly.
Right? So yeah.
So that is one thing that was very interesting in terms of, it also has a political aspect to it.
Yes, it does.
This conversation where how we can talk about this, or and I think during that all this reform movement that was happening and those stuff, then after some point in time, all this happened. There was like there was this struggle that was happening to for freedom in India.
Yes.
So a lot of people were struggling, and there were a lot of freedom fighters.
Yes.
And they wanted freedom. There's the oppression from the British people that they're looting the Indians. The Britishers are looting in, and so all that we know about freedom fighter is that the famous ones are that. This commonly known, Mahatma Gandhi and stuff. Were there any Indian Christians who contributed to the freedom fight? There was like, Christians as for asking this, when I had this question in mind, but now that we had so much conversation, I think there were a lot of Christians who were like, wanted to do good, and this service mentality that people had. And for this freedom fight struggle, were there any Christian Indians?
Yeah, in fact, there are a lot. Now, there were a lot of individuals, and if you talk about individuals, I think we can talk for eternity. So I just like to mention some key or prominent figures. Now, we'll begin with the associations. There were lots of groups, associations that were nationalists. That were saying that, although we are Christians, we are also Indians. Right? There is this predominant idea that if you are a Christian, you should be anti-Indian, sort of an idea. But that was not the majority perspective. Even before India's freedom. For example, let me just give you some Christian associations that had this in mind. The Bengal Christian Association, which was started by K.M. Banerjee. And then you have the Indian National Congress, right? The Indian National Congress was the first movement for Swaraj, for independence, right? For self-rule. Right, they were the first movement to say to the British that we can handle ourselves and we want freedom. And if you look at the Indian National Congress, right, in fact, it was founded in 1885. In its first annual meeting, which happened 2 years later in 1887, out of the 607 delegates that were present in the conference, 35 were Christians. Right, so you do the math. It is quite a number.
Yeah.
Right, 35 of the 607 were Christians, and International Congress was primarily at that particular point in time was for self-rule, was for freedom.
Yeah.
Right, we need freedom from the British. Right, they were Christians, like popular people like K.C. Banerjee, G.G. Nath, Peter Paul Pillai from Madras, and then you have Madhusudan Das from Orissa, a lawyer, and then Subramania, who are a lawyer from India. All these were Christians and were also part of the Indian National Congress. If you are a part of the Indian National Congress at that point in time, it means that you are fighting for your freedom. You want the British to leave. Right?
So it is something opposing.
Yes,
to the
it is
British.
opposing, and they were Christians. And in addition to Indian National Congress, Bengal Christian Association, and then you have in 1886 a church in Madras. Right, it is called the National Church of Madras, started by a medical doctor by the name of Parani Andy. Right, that was also a nationalist church. Then you have the Pune Christians Association, the Calcutta Christo Samaj by K.C. Banerjee, and then you have the Lucknow Christians Association. So you have lots of Christians Association, while they were dealing with Christian issues. Right?
Okay.
They were dealing with Christians issues also, but one of the things that was common in all of these associations was this: that they wanted Indian union, they wanted freedom, and they wanted Swaraj. Right? These were Christian organizations. Right? And they had this one goal, that India should be freed, that India should be independent from the British. Right? Now, in addition to these associations, lots of prominent individuals like K.T. Paul. K.T. Paul was a friend of Mahatma Gandhi. Now, he was also, in fact, he was the first person to coin the word Christian nationalism. Right? Which means that you can be a Christian and also be a patriot.
Okay.
You can love your country. You can stand for India and be a Christian also. And that is where the first, the only Indian and the last of the Governor Generals of India, Rajagopalachari, Rajaji, whom we famously call in Tamil Nadu, he famously said that K.T. Paul has discovered the unity between Christianity and Indian patriotism. Right? And so K.T. Paul was, at the forefront of Indian independence. And when he died, this is what Mahatma Gandhi said. He said that K.T. Paul was a thorough nationalist. Words of Mahatma Gandhi for K.T. Paul. And in addition to that, K.T. Paul also represented the Indian Christian community at the Round Table Conference that happened in London, between 1930 and 1931. Right? Wow. And so he was a stalwart of Indian independence, plus a Christian. And George Joseph, another very prominent Christian, who was a member of the Indian National Congress. Right? Now, George Joseph was was very famous because he went to jail along with Jawaharlal Nehru, Gandhi, and all these people. He was in jail with them. Right? And he was a member of the National Congress, he participated in the freedom fight just as Mahatma Gandhi did. And the famous thing about George Joseph is that remember, Mahatma Gandhi took a decision to take off all his robes and just put on a loin cloth.
Yeah.
He actually made that decision at George Joseph's house in Madurai.
Oh, wow.
Right? When he came to Madurai, it was at George Joseph's house that he decided that when looking at the people of India, I cannot, pretend to be someone else. And so he takes off his dress and he puts on only the loincloth. Since then, till his death, he remained in that attire. And it all started from George Joseph's house.
Wow.
Right? So he is a true nationalist. And then you have people like Brahmabandha Upadhyaya. Christians at that point in time were saying, because of the non-cooperation movement, should we cooperate with the British? Right? Along with Gandhi, a lot of the people of the Indian National Congress and the others said that non-cooperation movement is correct. Right? And Brahmabandha Upadhyaya was one of the persons who gave a Christian philosophical foundation for why we should not cooperate with the oppressors. Right? The Bible gives a picture of the master and the slave. Upadhyaya is giving a biblical reason as to why when someone oppresses you, you don't have to cooperate with them. right? So he's giving a biblical background for it. And for also the Swaraj and the Swadeshi movement, he gives biblical reasons for it. And he says that we have to fight for our independence. If you are a Christian, you have to be a nationalist. You cannot say because the British people, they could be Christian, but still you cannot side with the oppressors. You cannot side with them. So you have Brahmabandha Upadhyaya, V.S. Azarya is one. Then the poet, the famous poet, Narayan Varman Tilak. Right? He's a famous poet. And all his poems, he was a Christian. Most of his poems were surrounding India's independence. He was a thorough nationalist as well. Then Venkal Chakara is another Christian who was a lawyer. And who participated in this home rule movement and the non-cooperation movement in the 17s and the 20s. So he was another person. And S.K. Datta, and he's another person as well, a very famous Christian, who participated in the All India Conferences of Indian Christians in 1923, 33 and 34, who was also, along with Gandhi, most of the times wherever he went, participated in all of his meetings and stuff like that. So you have lots and lots of Christians. I can list more, but then it is very sad to see that the perspective that is in place in India right now is that Christians will support the British, and not India. And any sport you follow, you don't see that to be true. The Christians, even though they are in India, they support India only. Whether it is cricket or football or whatever you see, you don't support England. Right? But that is how the majority Indians look at it. No, but that is not true. And if you look at the nationalist movement, the freedom movement, you see Christian participation in it. I see why they try to say, because there is a point in what they say, but that is not the big picture you have to paint, right? Some Christians, because British missionaries were the people who helped them in their life, they did not want to fight against them. Okay, that is true. It was there. Right. For example, if you are the missionary, and I received Christ because of you, I will love you, right? And therefore will not raise my voice against you. Maybe that can happen. Right? But that is not to say I do not like my country, I like England, or I like the British. I do not want independence. Right?
It could be an individual thing.
It could be an individual thing
but
also.
I think another thing that you said is also where Mahatma Gandhi and he was with the person in Madurai at his house. And it kind of puts a sense like how close they were, and how united they were in conversation. Even though that person, they had certain beliefs in terms of religion, and they totally believed in Christ and the way they wanted to, but still they wanted something unified for India. The freedom part, where they wanted to give sort of certain things. I think there is some sort of unity over there where I could see, and I think religion or didn't have any separation in their relationship. Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, with them, I think the relationship it didn't have, because they have a unified goal of being free from, and even though they were Christians, they identified what Britishes did as an oppression, and things that Jesus would never accept in a certain way. Like what you're doing to this people, it is not right. And as you said in the beginning, the intention of a business or a trade mentality that they came in is not very biblical.
It is not biblical.
They wanted a lot of gain from having oppression sort of a thing.
See, the Bible clearly says that the famous rule of love, right? Do to others as you would have them do to you, right? So even the British will not accept, right? If India did exactly that to them, they will not accept it.
Exactly.
Right? so no, the Bible clearly says, you should not do to others what you don't want them to do to you. Right?
Exactly.
So it is very biblical to say that the kind of thing they did in India is not correct. Right?
The approach that they had in terms of business is not...
to control and to rule is you cannot rule over another community, right? That is not biblical. Right, but to say that was all the problem in India is also not true.
Yeah, true.
Now the Indians now what they want to say is the entire problem of India is colonialism. No,
Yeah.
we have deeper problems.
Yeah.
Colonialism is not the first, and there are much more serious issues, cultural, social issues in India that hinders our progress, that had hindered our progress in history than colonialism. Colonialism is not the biggest.
It's one
was
of the
not
part, yeah.
is one of is not a right thing. It's not correct, but we have deeper problems. Deeper problems that actually bring people down.
As we were talking about, their roles and their relationship with those people. So they were Christians and they were Indians at the same time. So a lot of people right now also, are like, just because if you ask me personally, I love India. For me, it's like India is the land where I should be, and a lot of my friends also they go abroad, they want to settle abroad for better housing. For me personally, I am so attached to India and this landmass, and everything is like so much that I basically. But I'm also truly into Christ. So now it is at this present age, it's compared to what was before, it's pretty much easy to identify this dual identity is what they say, as a Christian and also an Indian. But still there are some backlashes in a lot of other places. But back then, during those time, during the freedom fight and all, how did they manage their negotiate their dual identity as both colonial subjects, so they were part of the colonial subjects, and Christians predominantly in a Hindu country. So predominantly they were Hindu, but how did they manage their dual identity? Because those time, as you would like, during the times of freedom fight, they would have been seen as a product of the colonialism, but they completely supported the Hindu, the freedom fight that India needs to have, and they were truly Christians. So how did they, you think, manage to have those dual identity?
So that's a very good question. Now, as I said earlier, these Christians were able to differentiate between the colonialists and the missionaries. That is very important.
Okay.
Now, what Christianity gave them was something unique. Christianity gave them their identity, and that is to say that they are children of God. Right? That is, they are created in the image of God. Whether you're a Hindu, Christian, or a Muslim, all people are created in the image of God. And this image of God is tarnished because of sin. And through the death and resurrection of Christ, this image of God in the person is restored. Right? And so that gives them the power to love others as well. And so that was the first thing that came in their mind. Okay. Now, if you say that you are a follower of Christ, you have an identity in Christ. And what that means is to love your neighbor as yourself. Right? It is to love each and every human being, whether they hate you or whether they are oppressing you or not. But what they see in their day-to-day life was not that. They looked at the British and they found oppression. They found a group of people who are tarnishing other groups of people who are made in the image of God. And so these Christians said, enough is enough. What you're doing is wrong. You cannot oppress another group of people. You cannot tarnish the image of God which is in another person. And so they were able to clearly differentiate between what the colonialists were doing and what the missionaries were doing. One was soul and the other was physical. Right? What the transformation that happened in their soul, they received it. And in their day-to-day activities, when they found oppression, they were able to say, no, this is not right. And so they began to say that we will not stand with the oppressors. And so they identified themselves as Christians, and because they were Christians, they began to say that oppression is wrong and you need freedom. Because in Christ you have the true freedom. And it means that you have to respect one another, give human value and dignity to one another. That means you cannot oppress me. Right? You cannot oppress me. And they found in the form of the Europeans a group of oppressors.
Hmm.
And they said, we will stand against oppression. And so they were easily able to identify with the other Indians who were not Christians also.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They looked at others as brothers, right, who are made in the image of God.
Hmm.
Right? And so whether they accept my faith or not is irrelevant.
Hmm.
I'm standing with them because Christ does not like oppression.
Hmm.
Right? And therefore they were able to have this identity of both Indian and a Christian. So you can perfectly be a Christian and you can perfectly be an Indian.
Yeah.
Right? You know, Christ did not come to change your language or your culture.
Yeah.
You can be a follower of Christ within your own culture and within your own country.
Hmm.
So that is how they were able to do it.
Yeah, I think it all pulls back to the teachings of Jesus. It's like as you said, love your neighbor,
Yes.
and I think that is one of the main thing where you don't have to, as you said, you don't have to change the way, the cultural part where you are living or the country where you are living, but the Christ, what as Jesus said, it's like oppression of any other human being is not right. I think it pulls back to the teachings of Christ, and I think that is how I also have learned in a way, like, not I've been Christian for most of my life, but the reading and the teaching of what Jesus actually is trying to say is what kind of makes me think, okay, this other person is valuable. And so like all this history that we have, it's like so much of history that India has, and it's so vivid, and it's so there's a lot of ups and downs, and it's like so drastic. In the light of all this history, how do you see the way in which Christianity is perceived in our nation today, in 2025? How are we seeing it right now? What is your take on that?
Yeah, so if you're looking at the majority Indians and how they look at the history of India so far is very pessimistic. They look at history, particularly of India, and they say colonialism all the way, right?
Yeah.
The majority Indians are thinking, when are we going to be ourselves, right? Right from the 10th century onwards, we've been ruled by one group after the other, right? Starting with the sultans of the Middle East, right? Coming over here, and then the Mughals, and then the Europeans. And so they look at history, and they're not very happy, and say they want to go back to the golden days, of the period of Harshavardhan, or during the Gupta dynasty of the third, fourth, the 4th, 5th, 6th centuries. So that was sort of the golden age for the majority Indians, right? I will not say majority Indian. Actually, it's only a small group. The small group, but it is portrayed as though it is a majority Indians.
Yeah.
But so the idea is to say that we don't want the influence of outside people, outside beliefs and ideas. But particularly if you look at Christianity, the perspective of the majority Indians is that it is a Western belief.
Yeah,
right.
I get that a lot.
They think of Christianity as a Western belief, whereas theirs is a Eastern belief or a Indian belief. And so having that mindset, they think that Christianity is not for me. Right. So I think that is a major perspective that people have. But I think through our interview, we have demolished that fact. Christianity is not Western.
Yeah.
It started in if you say starting with Jesus, who was
Jew.
Not a Westerner.
Yeah.
Right. He was from Israel.
Yeah.
Right. And the early Christians were all people from the East and not from the West.
Yeah.
In fact, Christianity came to India before it reached Europe.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And the early Christians were what? Arabs, they were Syrians, they were Egyptians, Africans, right? They were, Jews, right? They were all Eastern people, not Western people.
Yeah.
So Christianity is not a Western religion. It is completely a Eastern. And moreover, it is not about region.
Yeah.
Christianity is not about, region. The Bible, I think in Galatians, I think it says, there is neither Greek nor Jew, male nor female, right? It is for all. It is for all nations.
Yeah.
Right? The gospel is for all nations. John 3:16, right? God, the Savior died and rose again for all people.
All people.
Not for India, not for only Europe. It is for all people. It is universal. The offer of salvation is universal. So it's not merely a Western religion or a Western import. Right? That is a very wrong way of understanding Christianity. So the viewers who are watching, right? Please understand that Christianity is not a Western religion. It did not come from Europe. Right, it was in India even before Christianity reached, Europe. There were lots of Eastern people, even before Europe received Christianity, who were Christians. I think that is a perspective that majority Indians have. Another reason to hate Christianity with all of this is that they think that the British have persecuted us. They have tortured us. They have taken so much away from us. They have robbed us. And they were Christians. And therefore, I will never become a Christian. That is another perspective that they have. But I think this is where we need to highlight. I think we talked about the difference between the colonialists and the missionaries. We need to strike that note very, very hard. Right? It is, here and there have been collaborations between the colonialists and the missionaries. But the agenda of the missionaries were completely different than the agenda of the colonialists. One was for wealth and land. The other was for soul. The other was to bring the message of Jesus Christ and to transform the society. Right? It is to transform the hearts of the people and the lives of the people. That was the goal of the missionaries. They did not want any land from here. Remember, most of them, I can name hundreds and hundreds of them, they've sold their property back home to build hospitals and stuff here.
Over here. They had a lot of property over there. They sold things. They came here and settled.
They did not come for wealth here. They came for Christ because they identified individuals who have not received Christ, and Christ, is the solution to all of humanity's problems. Right? The bondage that people are in, both spiritual and physical, the solution is Christ. They came to bring in that Christ. They did not want land. Remember Jesus when standing in front of Pontius Pilate. Pilate asks him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Thinking that as though Jesus was trying to establish himself as the soldier and ruler over the physical kingdom. He says, "My kingdom is not of this world." Right? So the missionaries who came here did not want, the different provinces of India. They wanted to bring Christ to the individual. And so it is very, very wrong to assume that, Christians and the colonizers were one and the same. Right? The Bible clearly condemns the colonizers. Right? As we already saw, do to others as you would have them do to you. The Bible clearly says that. So, that is a wrong conflation. Christianity should not be conflated with the colonizers. The Bible is very actively against, one people ruling over another person. So, if anyone is watching having this in mind, right, that is not Christianity. The true version of Christianity can be seen only in Christ. Go to Christ. Don't look at Christians and say, okay, this person is doing this. He's, looking at caste and he's robbing me. He's not living a good Christian. Don't look at Christian individuals. All of us are flawed and we need our Savior, and that's why He came to us. So the best example is to go to Christ. So that is what I would say. So have the British colonizers persecuted us, done so much to us? Yes, that is true. They've done some horrible things to Indians, but Christ has come to redeem us. Right? And so we have a future. We cannot dwell on the past. Right? If you look at reasons for why we are victims, we can find hundreds of reasons. But we have to stand up and say, yes, from here on, I'm going to get up and walk. Right? So if you're trying to discuss about the problems we had in Indian history, we can list a number of problems. And most of the problems were not caused by foreigners. It was caused by our own people. Right? Talk about the physical oppression that Indians were in. Right? Think about the caste system. Right? colonialism is just one part of the big issues we had in India, right? Think about the Jamindari system in India and how oppressive that was to the lower caste communities. Who separated the majority Indians to live outside the villages? Was it the Europeans? No, it was we did it ourselves. Who betrayed our own brothers to the British? Right? It was our own Indians.
Yeah.
Right? We divided. We were never a united nation at all. We were all divided based on communities and castes, and one group was against the other. And the Europeans were not responsible for it. We could not stand united against the Europeans. Right? We were all bribing each other, corrupt, and letting the Europeans take all our wealth. Right? What if we joined our hands together to fight against the Europeans? We do not want to join against join our hands with each other to fight against the Europeans. Right? So we should not put all the blame on the colonialists alone. India in its history had so much of problems, and one of the problems was colonialism. And to say all of it is colonialism is not right.
Not right. Yeah.
We have to look into ourselves and say we did it wrongly in the past, and we will correct ourselves in the future to make India a better nation.
Yeah.
So
I think that brings to a conclusion for our topic today, and it was very interesting, as you said. Colonialism is just one part, and it is one of the many problems, and India was already diverse, and colonialists also, it doesn't reflect the true Christianity.
Yes.
So I always remember one saying, when it comes to this topic, whenever we are having discussion with my friends, so if A.R. Rahman's background score or music, if somebody plays that poorly, would you blame A.R. Rahman, or would you play the person who played it poorly? So I think that is something, the situation with Christianity right now, where I would personally I would say you don't see what in the name of Jesus what people have done, the wrong things, example the colonialism and stuff, but I would suggest everybody to look at what actually Jesus tried to teach, or tell everybody. So that is one thing. So I think we have come to the end of the first episode. Very much amazing. So I think we had a very amazing conversation.
I did.
And I think I pretty much loved it. I don't know how much time we spent, and we spent quite a bit of time, and I think I loved the conversation. It's like very intriguing, and the flow, everything was like very smooth, and all the conversation that I was like a lot of new things, a lot of new information that I've learned in this conversation. And I think I have a lot of things to take back from this conversation, and it was very much intriguing, and overall it was very fun to talk with you. And
you're welcome. Yeah, it's a pleasure for me as well.
Yeah, thank you for like shedding so much light on various topics. And so I think everybody who was watching also had a lot of doubts or anything. If you have any questions or queries, I think you can drop it in the comment section, and we will get back to you as discuss about it, and we will get back to you, reply to it. And please let us know what you think about this whole thing. And since we are all new to this podcast thing, please look at this, have your perspective, and please share it to your friends who wanted to know more about this. And please shed your thoughts on this, what you think about this, and what you think needs to be discussed further. And we have a lot of topics to cover in this series. We have a lot of topics in discussion that we'll be having. So we'll be launching one episode every month, and so we are working on it. Thank you all for watching, and thank you for spending your precious time and sticking with us till the end. And we hope that some topic touches you and you revert back to us and we can have a conversation regarding this. Thank you, Mr. John. Thank you for
Yes,
joining
you're
us,
welcome.
and have a wonderful day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in for the very first episode of Ripples. Please share your thoughts in the comment section and share the video to any person that you think needs to watch this. And if you want to have further conversation regarding this or related to this topic, please feel free to reach to us, and we have the details in the comment section. So we are a part of NLF City Church. You can reach us out directly. You can come visit our church. It's in Nungambakam. The details are there in the description. Thank you for visiting. Please give a thumbs up if you like the video and subscribe to our channel. And please stay tuned for more updates as we'll be talking about various topics. And stay tuned for more videos. Thank you.